The moment your body gives up is the moment your life changes. The rain was relentless, hammering against my skin like it had something to prove, each drop sharp, cold, unforgiving, soaking through my thin jacket within seconds, clinging to me like a warning I didn't want to understand, my sneakers slipping slightly against the wet pavement as I forced myself forward, one step, then another, my lungs burning like I'd been breathing in ice instead of air, my chest tightening with every inhale until it felt like there was no space left inside me at all, like something invisible was pressing in, crushing me from the inside out, and I tried to tell myself it was just another panic attack, just another wave that would pass if I could hold on long enough. But this one was different. This one was louder, heavier, like it had weight, like it had intention, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just running from myself this time. I was running from something real, something that didn't care if I made it out of this alive or not. I glanced over my shoulder, rain blurring everything into streaks of light and shadow, the street lamps stretching into long golden lines, cars passing like ghosts. But there was something there, a presence I couldn't fully see but could feel, close enough to make my heart slam harder against my ribs, my breath catching in sharp, uneven bursts, my fingers trembling as I pressed them against my chest like I could physically force my heart to slow down, to listen, to stop betraying me. But it only got worse, the world tilting slightly, the ground no longer steady beneath my feet, my vision narrowing at the edges until everything felt too far away and too close at the same time. And then it happened, that moment, the one I always feared but could never predict, where my body just quit, my knees buckled without warning, my hands reaching out for something that wasn't there, the cold pavement rushing up to meet me, and I remember thinking, just for a second, that this was it, that this was how everything ended, not with a scream or a crash, but with silence, with rain, with the sound of my own breath disappearing into nothing, and then darkness swallowed everything whole, thick and immediate, like I'd been pulled underwater without a chance to fight it. And when I came back, it wasn't gentle, it wasn't slow, it was sudden, like being thrown back into a world I didn't recognize, my eyes snapping open to a ceiling that was too white, too clean, too still, the kind of stillness that didn't belong to hospitals or cheap apartments or any place I'd ever been before. I didn't move at first, couldn't, my body heavy, wrapped in something soft, warmer than it should have been, the faint scent of something unfamiliar in the air, expensive, controlled, not a single hint of damp or decay or anything that matched the storm I'd just been drowning in. My fingers curled slightly against the fabric beneath me, smooth, almost weightless, and that's when the realization hit, sharp and immediate. This wasn't a sidewalk. This wasn't a hospital. This wasn't anywhere I should be. I pushed myself up too quickly, my head spinning, the room coming into focus piece by piece, tall windows, dark curtains pulled halfway open, soft light filtering through the rain outside. Everything arranged with a kind of precision that made it feel less like a bedroom and more like a place where decisions were made, where control lived. My heart started racing again, slower this time, more deliberate, like it was trying to warn me instead of escape. And then I saw him, standing near the window like he'd been there the entire time, like he hadn't moved an inch since I'd opened my eyes, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit that looked untouched by the weather outside. Not a wrinkle, not a drop of water, his presence filling the room without him having to say a single word, his gaze fixed on me with a calm that didn't feel comforting. It felt measured, like he was taking in every detail, every reaction, every breath I took, and for a second, I forgot how to speak, forgot how to think. All I could do was stare, trying to piece together how I had gone from collapsing in the rain to waking up here, in a place that felt too quiet, too controlled, too far removed from anything familiar. Where am I? My voice came out smaller than I intended, rough from the cold, and whatever silence had swallowed me before. He didn't answer right away, didn't rush, didn't look surprised by the question. He just watched me, and somehow that made it worse, made the air feel heavier, like I was waiting for something I didn't understand yet. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to be heard. "You're somewhere safe," he said, and the word safe lingered in the air like it meant something different to him than it did to me. I swallowed, my throat dry, my mind racing to catch up, I didn't ask for this, I said, trying to push past the unease settling in my chest, trying to find some kind of control in a situation that felt like it had none. His expression didn't change, not even slightly. If anything, it sharpened, just enough for me to notice. No, he replied calmly, you didn't. And there was something in the way he said it that made my stomach drop, not cruel, not threatening, just certain, like whatever had happened out there, whatever had brought me here, had already been decided long before I opened my eyes. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself without thinking, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt, how out of place, how unprepared, my thoughts scrambling to make sense of the last thing I remembered. The rain, the footsteps, that feeling of being watched, of not being alone even when the street looked empty. And then it hit me, not all at once, but enough to make my pulse spike again. I hadn't just been having a panic attack. I had been running from something I couldn't fully see but could feel closing in, something that hadn't stopped when I fell, something that hadn't disappeared just because I lost consciousness. My eyes snapped back to him, sharper this time, more focused. Why am I here? I asked, and this time, I didn't look away. He held my gaze for a moment longer, like he was deciding how much to say, how much I could handle, and then he took a single step closer, not threatening, not rushed, just enough to shift the space between us, enough to make it clear that whatever answer he was about to give wasn't going to make this simpler. His voice dropped slightly, quieter, more precise. Because whoever you were running from, he said, wasn't going to stop. A pause. Just long enough for the words to settle, just long enough for the fear to find its way back in. And now, he added, his eyes never leaving mine. They know exactly where you are. The words did not hit all at once. They settled in slowly, like cold water seeping through fabric, and I felt it in my chest before I fully understood it. That quiet shift from confusion to something sharper, something heavier, my fingers tightening around the edge of the blanket as I tried to steady my breathing. But it was already slipping again, not as violent as before, not yet, but close enough to make me aware of every inhale, every exhale, like I had to remind my body how to function. That does not make any sense, I said, forcing the words out even though my voice felt unsteady. I was just outside. I stopped myself because even as I said it, I knew it was not true, not completely. I had not been just outside. I had been running, and that detail pressed against my thoughts like something trying to break through, something I was not ready to face yet. He watched me closely, not interrupting, not correcting, just observing in that same controlled way that made it impossible to read him fully. You collapsed 3 blocks from here, he said after a moment, his tone calm, almost clinical, like he was stating a fact that did not need explanation. In the middle of the street, 3 blocks, that number echoed in my head. Too close, far too close to wherever this place was, wherever he had taken me, and that realization made my stomach tighten. You brought me here, I said, and it was not a question, it was a statement, one that felt heavier the moment it left my lips. He did not deny it, did not even hesitate. Yes, just that, simple, direct, like there was no reason to hide it, like he did not need to justify it. I swallowed, my mind racing again, trying to piece together something that made sense, something that gave me a foothold in a situation that felt like it was slipping further out of my control with every second. Why? I asked, and this time the word came out sharper, more urgent. Why would you do that? A pause, not long, but enough for me to feel it, for me to notice the way his gaze shifted slightly, not away from me, but inward, like he was choosing his answer carefully. Because leaving you there would have been a mistake, he said, and there was something in his voice this time, something subtle but unmistakable, certainty, not concern, not kindness, certainty, like he had calculated the outcome and decided this was the only acceptable option. I let out a breath. I did not realize I had been holding my thoughts tangling together again. A mistake for who? I asked quietly, and that was when something changed, not in the room, not in his posture, but in the space between us, a shift so slight it might have been invisible to anyone else. But I felt it, like the air had tightened just a fraction. For you, he said, and this time there was no pause, no hesitation, just that same calm delivery that somehow made the words feel heavier instead of lighter. I looked at him, really looked this time, taking in the details I had been too overwhelmed to notice before. The clean lines of his suit, The way it fit like it had been made specifically for him. The stillness in the way he stood, not rigid, not tense, just completely in control of his own space. And then his eyes, steady, focused, unreadable in a way that made it clear he was used to being the one who knew more, who saw more, who decided more. And that realization sent a small, unwelcome chill through me. I do not even know who you are, I said, my voice softer now, less defiant, more honest, because that was the truth. I was in a place that did not belong to me, speaking to a man I did not know, about a situation I did not understand, and somehow I was expected to accept that I was safer here than anywhere else. He took another step closer, not enough to crowd me, not enough to make me feel cornered, but enough to make the distance between us feel intentional. Adrian, he said, and the way he said his own name was as controlled as everything else about him, like it carried weight beyond just a label. Adrian Volkov. The name settled in my mind. Unfamiliar but significant, like it should. Means something even if I did not yet know what. Emily. I replied automatically, my own name feeling strangely small in comparison, like it belonged to a different version of me, one that had not collapsed in the rain, one that had not woken up in a place like this. His gaze sharpened just slightly, not in recognition, but in acknowledgement, like he was filing it away, adding it to whatever mental list he was already building. Emily Carter, he repeated, and the fact that he already knew my last name made my stomach drop again. How do you know that? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. He did not smile, did not react in any obvious way, but there was something in his expression that suggested this was not surprising to him. Because I do not take risks I cannot measure, he said simply, and that answer did not explain anything, not really, but it told me enough. Enough to understand that whatever situation I had fallen into, it was not random, not entirely. There was intention here, calculation, and I was now part of it whether I liked it or not. My fingers tightened again, this time not out of fear, but out of something else, something closer to frustration, to resistance. I need to leave, I said, and this time I meant it, not as a reaction, not as a panic response, but as a decision. I shifted slightly, moving the blanket aside as I prepared to stand. But before I could fully push myself up, his voice cut through the movement, calm, steady, but firm enough to stop me without raising in volume. No. Just that. One word. And it landed heavier than anything else he had said so far. I froze. Not because he had moved, not because he had done anything to physically stop me, but because of the certainty in that single word, the way it left no room for negotiation, no space for misunderstanding. You cannot leave, he added. And this time there was something else beneath the calm, not anger, not aggression, but something closer to inevitability, like he was stating a fact that had already been decided. That is not your choice right now. My heart kicked harder at that, the familiar edge of panic threatening to rise again. But I forced myself to breathe. Slower this time, more controlled. I was not outside anymore. I was not collapsing in the rain. I was here, and if I lost control now, I would lose whatever small advantage I still had. You do not get to decide that, I said, meeting his gaze again, forcing my voice to stay steady even as my pulse raced. Something flickered in his eyes then, something brief but noticeable, not surprise, but recognition, like he had expected resistance and was simply noting the form it took. You are right, he said after a moment, and that answer caught me off guard, just enough to make me hesitate. I do not, he continued, his voice just as calm as before, but the situation does. A pause, just long enough for the weight of that statement to settle in. And right now, he added quietly, the situation is not in your favor. I held his gaze, my mind racing again, trying to find an opening, a way out, a way to regain control of something, anything. And then it came back, that feeling from before, that presence, that sense that I had not been alone out there, that I had been running for a reason I could not fully remember yet. My breath caught slightly, my thoughts shifting, realigning. Who was it? I asked suddenly, the question slipping out before I could filter it. His expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened just enough for me to know I had touched on something important. That depends, he said, his voice lower now, more precise, on how much you actually remember. And the way he said it made my stomach drop again, because deep down, beneath the confusion, Beneath the fear, I knew there was something I had not faced yet, something waiting just beyond the edge of my memory, and whatever it was not finished with me. I tried to reach for it, that missing piece, that fragment of memory hovering just out of reach, but every time I got close, it slipped away like water through my fingers, leaving behind only the feeling, that sharp, pressing certainty that something had been wrong long before I hit the ground. My breathing slowed, but my mind did not. It moved faster now, retracing steps I could not fully see, searching for something solid, something real. I remember the rain, I said slowly, my voice quieter now, more focused, and I remember running. The word lingered, heavier than it should have been, because running implied a reason, and that reason was still just beyond my grasp. Adrian did not interrupt, did not rush me. He just watched, the same way he had from the beginning. Like this was a process he understood better than I did. There were people, I added, the image faint, blurred at the edges, but there, enough to make my chest tighten again. I think someone was following me. I looked up at him, searching for confirmation, for denial, for anything that would make this clearer, but his expression gave me nothing easily. You are starting to remember, he said instead, and that was not an answer, but it was not a dismissal either. It was something in between, something that told me I was not wrong, and that realization sent a small wave of cold through me, because if I was not wrong, then whatever I had been running from was real, and it had not simply disappeared when I collapsed. Why me? I asked, the question coming out sharper than I intended. Why would anyone be following me? It sounded almost ridiculous when I said it out loud, like I was missing something obvious, something that should have been clear from the beginning. Adrian tilted his head slightly, not in confusion, but in consideration, like he was weighing how much to say. That is the part you need to answer, he said, and I let out a small, frustrated breath, because that was not helpful, not immediately, but something about the way he said it made me pause, made me reconsider, because he was not dismissing the question, he was redirecting it, pushing it back toward me like he expected me to know more than I was admitting, or more than I realized. I shifted slightly on the bed, my feet brushing against the floor, cool and solid beneath me, grounding me just enough to think more clearly, to focus. I work at a bookstore, I said, almost automatically, as if stating something normal would make this situation feel normal again. I go home. I go to work. That is it. I shook my head slightly, the logic not adding up. I do not have enemies. I do not have anything worth chasing. Adrian's gaze did not waver, but there was something in it now, something sharper, more attentive, like he had been waiting for me to say that. Everyone believes that, he said quietly, until they realize they are wrong. The words settled heavier than I expected, and I felt that shift again, that subtle realignment in my thoughts, because maybe this was not about what I thought I had. Maybe it was about something I did not know I had at all, something small, something overlooked, something that had suddenly become important to someone else. My mind moved quickly now, scanning through the past few days, the past week, looking for anything out of place, anything unusual, and at first, there was nothing, just routine, just normal, until there was not, until a small detail surfaced, faint but persistent, like a thread I could finally follow. There was a man, I said slowly, my voice lowering as the memory sharpened just enough to feel real. He came into the store yesterday. Adrian did not move, but I could feel his attention shift, focus narrowing. He asked a lot of questions. I continued, my fingers tightening slightly against the edge of the bed again. Not about books, not really, just about me. I swallowed, the unease returning, but this time it was different, more specific, more directed. I thought it was strange, but I did not think. I trailed off because I had not thought anything. Not at the time. It had just been a moment, something I dismissed, something I let pass without questioning it. Adrian took a step closer, just one, but it changed the space again, made the air feel more focused, more contained. What kind of questions? He asked, and his voice was still calm, still controlled. But there was an edge to it now, something sharper beneath the surface. I closed my eyes briefly, trying to pull the details into focus. Where I lived, how long I had worked there, if I closed the store at night. My eyes opened again, meeting his, things that did not seem important at the time. Adrian's expression did not change, but something in his posture did, something subtle but unmistakable, like a piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place for him, even if I was still catching up. And you answered, he said, not accusing, not judgmental, just stating a fact. I hesitated for half a second, then nodded, because I had not seen the danger in it. Not then. Yes, I admitted quietly, the words sitting heavier now, because now it mattered, now it meant something, now it was part of something bigger. Adrian exhaled slowly, not in frustration, but in confirmation, like this was aligning with something he had already suspected. That is when it started, he said, and my heart skipped slightly at that. Started, I repeated, the word catching in my throat, because that meant there was a beginning, which meant there could be an end, but also meant there was a middle, and I was in it now whether I wanted to be or not. You were noticed, he continued, his voice steady, deliberate. And once someone decides to notice you, they do not simply stop. I felt that cold sensation again, sharper this time, more defined, because this was no longer abstract. It was not just a feeling, it was not just a vague sense of being. Followed, it was something that had started with a moment I had not taken seriously, a conversation I had not questioned, a choice I had made without thinking. So what happens now? I asked, and this time the question was not about leaving, not about control. It was about understanding, about survival in a situation I did not fully comprehend yet. Adrian held my gaze for a moment longer, and then, for the first time since I had woken up, there was something different in his expression, not softer, not warmer, but more direct, more intentional, like he was no longer deciding whether to involve me, but how much to reveal. Now, he said quietly, you stay exactly where you are. A pause, just long enough for the weight of that to settle in again. Because the moment you step outside, his voice lowered slightly, not threatening, but precise. You are no longer unpredictable. I frowned slightly, the logic catching my attention even through the fear. Unpredictable, I repeated, and he nodded once, a small, controlled motion. Right now, they do not know what you remember, they do not know what you understand, and they do not know who you are connected to. Another pause, his eyes locking onto mine with that same steady intensity. That uncertainty is the only thing keeping you safe. My breath caught slightly at that, because it made sense in a way I did not want it to. In a way that made this feel less like a nightmare and more like something structured, something calculated, something real. And for the first time since I woke up, the fear shifted again, not disappearing, not lessening, but changing shape, becoming something sharper, something more focused, because this was not over, not even close. And whatever I had stepped into, whatever had found me in that bookstore, it had not chosen me by accident. The silence after his words was heavier than anything else in the room. It did not press against my ears, it pressed against my thoughts, settling in slowly, reshaping everything I thought I understood about what was happening, about what I was supposed to do next. I stayed where I was, not because I agreed with him, but because for the first time since I woke up, moving did not feel like control. It felt like a mistake, like stepping into something I could not see yet. My fingers rested lightly against the fabric beneath me, grounding myself again, focusing on something simple, something real. So I just stay here, I said, my voice quieter now, more measured, and wait. The word felt wrong the moment I said it. Too passive, too uncertain. Adrian's gaze did not soften, but it shifted slightly, like he recognized the difference in my tone, the shift from panic to something more controlled. You stay, he corrected calmly. But you do not wait. I frowned slightly, the distinction catching my attention immediately. Then what am I supposed to do? I asked, and this time the question was not defensive. It was direct, intentional, because if I was going to be here, if I was going to follow his rules even for a moment, I needed to understand them. Adrian stepped closer again, not enough to crowd me, but enough to make it clear that this conversation mattered, that it was not something he would leave unfinished. You think, he said simply, and I let out a small breath, almost a laugh, because that sounded too simple for something that felt this complicated. I have been thinking, I replied, a hint of frustration slipping through despite my effort to stay calm. And it has not exactly helped. His expression did not change, but there was a slight shift in his eyes, something sharper, more focused. You have been reacting, he said, and the word landed differently than I expected, not as criticism, But as a correction, there is a difference. I held his gaze, the meaning settling in slowly, because he was right. I had been reacting to the panic, to the fear, to the confusion. Every decision I had made since waking up had been immediate, emotional, driven by the need to escape rather than understand. And that realization made something in me steady, just a little, enough to feel the difference. So what am I missing? I asked, and this time I did not rush the words. I let them settle, let the question carry its weight. Adrian watched me for a moment longer, as if measuring whether I was ready for the answer. And then he spoke, slower this time, more deliberate. You are assuming they chose you, he said, and I felt that shift again. That subtle realignment of thought, because that had been my assumption, that this had started with me, that I had done something, that I had been the reason this was happening. If they did not choose me, I said carefully, following the logic as it formed. Then what? Adrian's voice did not change, but the meaning behind it did, becoming sharper, more precise. Then you crossed into something that was already in motion. The words settled deeper than anything else he had said so far, because they changed the entire shape of the situation. It was not about being targeted. It was about being in the wrong place at the wrong time, about stepping into something without realizing it. And suddenly the memory of the bookstore shifted in my mind. Not just the man, not just the questions, but everything around it. The timing, the feeling, the way the air had seemed just slightly off, like something had been happening that I could not see. You think it was not just him, I said slowly, my voice lowering as the realization took form. Adrian did not nod, did not confirm directly, but his silence was enough. It was not just one man. It was something larger, something that had already been moving before I ever noticed it. My pulse picked up again, but this time it was different. Not panic, not fear. Something sharper, more focused. Then why talk to me at all? I asked, the question forming quickly now. If I was not part of it, why would he draw attention to me? Adrian's gaze held steady, and this time there was no pause before he answered. Because you were already there, he said, and the simplicity of it made my breath catch slightly, because that meant proximity mattered, presence mattered. Being there at the wrong moment was enough. You saw something, he continued, or you were close enough to something that it made you relevant. I shook my head slightly, the memory still incomplete, still frustratingly out of reach. I do not remember seeing anything, I said, and there was a hint of frustration in my voice again, because if this was about something I had seen, something I had missed, then I needed to find it. I needed to understand it. Adrian's expression did not shift, but his voice softened slightly, not in comfort, but in clarity. You do not need to remember everything, he said. You only need to remember enough. I looked at him, really looked this time, searching for something I could use, something I could hold on to. Enough for what? I asked, and this time the question felt heavier. More important, Adrian took a small step back, just enough to create space again, but not distance. His presence still filled the room, still controlled the atmosphere in a way that made everything else feel secondary. Enough to understand why they have not come for you yet, he said, and that made my heart skip, just slightly, because I had not thought about that. Not fully. I had assumed they were coming, assumed it was only a matter of time. But if what he was saying was true, then something was holding them back, something was making them hesitate. You said uncertainty. I murmured, recalling his earlier words, and he nodded once, a small, precise movement. Yes, he said, and uncertainty does not exist without a reason. I felt it then, that shift, that subtle change in perspective, because this was not just about hiding, not just about staying out of sight. It was about understanding the balance, the space between what they knew and what they did not. And for the first time since I woke up, I felt something different settle in my chest. Not calm, not safety, but clarity, fragile and incomplete, but real. So I stay here, I said slowly, repeating it, but this time it felt different, more intentional. And I figure out what they think I know. Adrian's gaze held mine, steady, unwavering. And for a moment, there was something there, something almost approving, though it never fully formed. Exactly, he said quietly, and the word landed with more weight than anything else he had said so far, because it was not just confirmation. It was direction, it was purpose. And as the rain continued to fall outside the tall windows, softer now, more distant. I realized something that made my chest tighten in a completely different way. I was not just hiding here. I was part of something now, something I did not choose, something I did not understand yet, but something that had already changed the direction of my life, and whatever came next, whatever I uncovered, whatever I remembered, it was not going to be something I could walk away from, not easily, not completely, because the moment I stepped into that store, the moment I answered those questions without thinking, I had already crossed a line I could not see at the time, and now, standing on the other side of it, there was no going back to who I had been before. I did not realize how quiet the room had become until I focused on it, the kind of silence that does not feel empty, but controlled, like every sound that should exist had been deliberately removed. No distant traffic, no voices, no random interruptions, just the faint rhythm of rain against the glass and the steady, measured sound of my own breathing, and it made me aware of something I had not fully processed yet. This place was not just private, it was protected, designed that way, built to keep things in or out. I was not sure which one applied to me yet. I shifted slightly, my feet pressing more firmly against the floor now, testing my balance, testing myself. The earlier dizziness had faded enough for me to stand, but I did not move right away, because movement here felt different. It felt observed, like every choice carried weight. How long? I asked, breaking the silence carefully. How long have I been here? Adrian's gaze flicked toward the window for a fraction of a second before returning to me. Less than 2 hours, he said, and that surprised me more than anything else so far, because it felt longer. It felt like time had stretched, slowed, reshaped itself around everything that had happened. That is not possible. I murmured, more to myself than to him, because in 2 hours, my entire understanding of my life had shifted. Everything I thought was stable now felt uncertain, and that realization settled deeper than I expected. Adrian did not correct me, did not argue. He simply let the silence fill the space again, like he understood that I needed to process it in my own way. I took a breath, slower this time, more controlled, and then I moved, carefully, deliberately, swinging my legs over the side of the bed and standing up, the floor cool beneath my feet, grounding, real. I waited a second, testing the balance, waiting for the room to tilt, but it did not. Not this time. Good, he said quietly, and the single word made me look up, because it was the first time he had acknowledged something I did not say, something I simply did, and that small shift did not go unnoticed. I straightened slightly, my posture adjusting without thinking, as if his presence demanded it, even without force, even without pressure. If I am staying, I said, choosing my words carefully now, then I need to understand the rules. His expression remained unchanged, but there was a subtle shift in his stance, something more attentive, more engaged, like this was the part he had been waiting for. You already understand the most important one, he replied, his voice steady. You do not leave. I exhaled slowly, nodding once, accepting it for now, not because I agreed, but because it was part of the situation whether I liked it or not. What else? I asked, and this time there was no hesitation in my voice. Adrian took a step toward the door, then paused, glancing back at me briefly. You do not assume anything, he said, and that caught me off guard, more than I expected. I have been doing nothing but assuming, I admitted, and there was a faint edge of honesty in it, because that was exactly what I had been doing, trying to fill in the gaps with logic that did not fully apply, trying to make sense of something that was not meant to be simple. That is why you feel lost, he said, and again, it was not criticism, it was observation, precise and direct. You are trying to force a pattern onto something you do not fully see yet. I let that sit for a moment, because it was true, uncomfortably true, and acknowledging it made something in me shift again, not weaker, but more aware, more focused. Then what do I do instead? I asked, and this time the question felt different, more grounded, more intentional. Adrian opened the door slightly, just enough to reveal a glimpse of the hallway beyond, wide, quiet. The same controlled atmosphere extending beyond this room. You observe, he said, and you listen. I stepped forward slowly, instinctively drawn toward the open space, but I stopped just short of the doorway, aware of the boundary without needing to be told. The hallway felt different, not dangerous, but not neutral either, like stepping into it meant stepping further into whatever this place represented. Observe what? I asked quietly, my eyes scanning the visible space, the clean lines, the absence of clutter, the way everything seemed intentional. Adrian's voice came from just ahead of me now, still calm, still measured. Everything, he said, and I felt that word settle differently than the others, because it was not vague, it was expansive. It meant there were details here I had not noticed yet, things I had overlooked, patterns I had not seen, and suddenly the room behind me felt smaller, not physically, but mentally, like it had been a starting point, not the full picture. I took a small step closer to the doorway, stopping again at the threshold, my hand brushing lightly against the frame, grounding myself in the moment, and listening. I repeated, my voice lower now, more focused. Adrian glanced back at me once more, his expression unchanged but his attention clear. People reveal more than they intend, he said, especially when they believe they are in control. The words lingered, sharp and precise, and something in them clicked into place, because that was not just advice, it was insight, a way of seeing things that I had not considered before. I nodded slowly, more to myself than to him. And then I realized something else, something that had been sitting just beneath the surface of everything we had discussed so far. You are not guessing, I said, my voice steady, certain. You already know something. Adrian did not respond immediately, but he did not deny it either, and that silence was answer enough. My pulse picked up slightly, not from fear, but from realization, because this was not just about me figuring things out. This was about understanding what he already knew, what he had already seen, what he had already decided. How much? I asked, the question direct. Now, unavoidable, Adrian's gaze met mine again, steady, unreadable, and for a moment, the room felt even quieter than before, like everything was waiting for his answer. Enough, he said finally, and the word was simple, but it carried weight, more than any explanation could have, because it meant he was ahead of me, steps ahead, maybe more, and whatever I was just beginning to understand. He had already considered, already analyzed, already placed within a larger picture I could not yet see. I held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement, because whether I liked it or not, I was in his world now, playing by rules I was only starting to understand, and as the rain outside softened into a quiet, steady rhythm, I realized something that settled deep in my chest. This was not just about staying safe anymore. It was about learning fast enough to keep up. Because in a place like this, hesitation was not neutral, it was a risk, and I had already taken enough of those without realizing it. The hallway did not echo when I stepped into it, and that was the first thing I noticed, not the size, not the design, but the absence of sound, my bare feet moving across the polished floor without leaving a trace, without even a faint whisper, as if the space itself had been designed to absorb everything, every movement, every distraction. And it made me more aware of myself, of each breath, each shift in posture, each small decision that felt larger than it should have been. Adrian moved ahead of me without looking back, not checking if I followed, not needing to, because something about his presence made the direction clear without instruction, and I realized that was part of it, part of how this place worked. You did not need to be told what to do when everything around you already guided you there. I kept a few feet of distance between us, not out of fear, but out of instinct, a boundary that felt necessary even if I could not fully explain why. The hallway stretched farther than I expected, lined with doors that were closed, each one identical, no labels, no markings, nothing that gave away what was behind them. And that uniformity made it harder to read, harder to understand, because there were no clues offered freely here. Everything had to be noticed, chosen, interpreted. This is your room, Adrian said, stopping at the first door on the left, and for a second, I did not realize what he meant, because we had just come from a room, but when he opened it, I understood. This was different, similar in design, the same clean lines, the same controlled atmosphere, but this one felt less observed, less like a place I had been brought to and more like a place I was meant to stay. And the other one, I asked quietly, my voice steady, the one I woke up in. Adrian's hand rested briefly against the doorframe before he answered. That was temporary, he said, and the word lingered. Temporary, like everything here had a purpose, a function. Nothing existed without intention. I stepped inside slowly, my eyes adjusting to the space, taking in the details automatically now. The bed positioned against the far wall. The windows taller than I expected, the same rain tapping softly against the glass. A chair placed near the corner. Nothing excessive, nothing unnecessary, everything exactly where it needed to be. You said observe. I murmured, almost to myself, my gaze moving across the room again, more deliberately this time, looking for patterns, for inconsistencies, for anything that stood out. Adrian leaned slightly against the doorframe, watching me in that same quiet way, not interrupting, not guiding, just allowing the process to unfold. I moved closer to the window, my fingers brushing lightly against the cool surface of the glass, the rain outside distorting the view just enough to make everything feel slightly unreal. The city beyond blurred into shapes and lights, movement without clarity, and for a moment, I felt that same disorientation from earlier, that sense of being removed from everything familiar. But this time, it did not overwhelm me. It focused me, because now I understood that feeling was part of it, part of the environment, part of what made this place what it was. There are no personal items, I said slowly, turning back toward him, my voice thoughtful, measured, nothing that suggests anyone actually lives here. Adrian's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened slightly, acknowledging the observation. That is intentional, he said, and there was no hesitation in the answer, no attempt to soften it. Why? I asked, and this time the question was not reactive. It was analytical. Adrian stepped fully into the room now, his presence filling the space in a way that made everything else feel secondary. Because attachment creates patterns, he said, and patterns can be predicted. I felt that settle in immediately, the logic clear, direct, unavoidable. This place was not just controlled. It was designed to avoid predictability, to remove anything that could be used against it, and suddenly the simplicity of the room made sense. It was not empty. It was protected. So nothing here belongs to anyone, I said, more to confirm than to question. Adrian met my gaze, steady, unwavering, correct, and there was something about that answer that shifted the way I saw the space entirely. This was not a home, not in the way I understood it. It was something else, something more strategic, more deliberate, and that realization made me more aware of my own presence here, of how temporary or permanent it might be. I moved away from the window slowly, my thoughts aligning more clearly now, less scattered, more focused, and me. I said quietly, do I belong here? The question felt heavier than I expected, not just about the room, but about the situation, about everything that had led me here. Adrian did not answer immediately, and that pause was different from the others, longer, more deliberate, like he was considering not just the words, but the meaning behind them, right now. He said finally, his voice calm but precise, this is the only place where you are not at a disadvantage. I let out a slow breath, absorbing that, because it was not an answer to the question I asked, not directly, but it was an answer to something deeper, something more important, and I realized that was how he operated, not giving unnecessary details, not answering the obvious question when a more relevant one existed beneath it. That is not the same as belonging, I said, and this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just clarity. Adrian's gaze held mine for a moment longer, and for the first time, there was something there, something subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. No, he agreed quietly. It is not. The honesty in that response surprised me, not because I expected him to lie, but because I expected him to avoid the distinction altogether. And that small moment of clarity shifted something again, just slightly, just enough to make the situation feel more defined, more real. I nodded once, not in agreement, but in understanding, because whether I belonged here or not did not change the reality of where I was, of what I needed to do next. Then I start with what I know, I said, more to myself than to him, my mind already moving, already organizing the pieces we had discussed, the bookstore, the man, the questions, the timing, the feeling that something had been off before I even noticed it. Adrian did not interrupt, did not correct, he simply watched, and for the first time, that did not feel unsettling. It felt expected, like part of the process, like he was waiting to see how far I could go on my own. And I figure out what I missed, I added quietly, my voice steady, more certain now. Adrian inclined his head slightly, a small Controlled acknowledgement. Exactly, he said, and as the rain outside continued its steady rhythm, softer now, almost distant, I realized something that settled deep in my chest. This was no longer about fear, not entirely. It was about understanding, about learning fast enough to keep up with something that had already started moving long before I noticed it. And for the first time since I woke up, I did not feel like I was falling behind. I felt like I was finally beginning to see the shape of what I had stepped into, even if I did not yet understand where it would lead. I did not sit down right away, even though the room invited it, even though the stillness suggested rest, because something in me had shifted too much for that, something that refused to go back to the version of myself that would have collapsed onto the nearest surface just to escape the pressure of everything I did not understand. Instead, I stayed standing near the center of the room, my eyes moving slowly, deliberately, not just seeing but studying, letting each detail settle before moving to the next, the position of the chair relative to the window, the exact alignment of the bed against the wall, the absence of anything personal, anything unnecessary, and the more I looked, the more I realized it was not just minimal, it was precise, every element placed with intention, not for comfort, but for function, and that thought anchored me in a way nothing else had so far, because it meant this place followed rules, even if I did not fully know them yet. Rules could be understood, rules could be learned. You are already adjusting, Adrian said quietly from behind me, his voice cutting through the silence without disrupting it. I did not turn immediately, did not break my focus, because reacting too quickly felt like stepping backward, like losing the progress I had just made. I am paying attention, I replied instead, my voice steady, more controlled than before, and when I finally turned to face him, I saw something in his expression that had not been there earlier, not approval exactly, but recognition, like he had expected resistance, and was now seeing something else, something more aligned with how he thought. Most people do not, he said, and there was no judgment in it, just observation. They look without seeing, listen without hearing. I nodded slightly, because I understood what he meant now, not just as a concept, but as something real, something I had already been doing without realizing it, missing details, dismissing moments, assuming things that did not deserve to be assumed. That is how I missed it, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. The memory of the bookstore returning again, sharper this time, more defined. The man's voice, the way he stood too close to the counter, the questions that had felt casual but now carried weight. Not missed, Adrian corrected, his voice calm but precise. Overlooked. The distinction settled differently, because missing something suggested absence, but overlooking meant it had been there, right in front of me, and I had chosen not to see it, whether consciously or not. I exhaled slowly, letting that settle, letting the responsibility of it take shape without letting it overwhelm me, because this was not about blame, it was about understanding, about recognizing the pattern so I would not repeat it. Then I do not overlook anything else, I said, and this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just intention. Adrian watched me for a moment longer, then moved further into the room, his steps quiet, controlled, as if even his movement followed the same principles as everything else here. Then start with what is closest, he said. And I frowned slightly, not in confusion, but in thought, because that sounded simple, but I knew it was not meant to be taken at face value. I glanced around the room again, slower this time, more focused, starting from where I stood, the floor beneath my feet, the texture, the temperature, nothing unusual, nothing out of place. Then the walls, smooth, unmarked, consistent. Then the furniture, each piece placed with intention, nothing added, nothing missing. And then I stopped my gaze, settling on something I had not questioned before, something that had been there the entire time. The clothes I was wearing, dry, clean, different from what I had been wearing in the rain. My breath caught slightly, not in panic, but in realization, because I had accepted it without thinking, had moved past it as if it did not matter. Someone changed my clothes, I said slowly, my voice quieter now, more focused. Adrian did not react immediately, but his silence was enough to confirm it. And that realization shifted something again, not in fear, but in awareness, because it meant there had been a moment, a gap in my memory where something had happened without my knowledge, without my control. Who? I asked, and this time the question was direct, unavoidable. Adrian met my gaze, steady, unflinching. "A doctor," he said, and the answer was simple, straightforward, but it carried implications. Because it meant this place was not just secure, it was prepared, equipped for situations like mine, for people like me, and that thought settled deeper than I expected. "You expected this," I said, not as an accusation, but as a realization. Adrian's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened slightly, acknowledging the direction of my thoughts. "I prepare for possibilities," he said, and that was not the same as expecting, but it was close enough to tell me that nothing here was accidental, nothing was left to chance. I nodded slowly, absorbing that, because it changed how I saw everything again, not just the room, but the situation. This was not a reaction to what happened to me. It was part of something larger, something already in motion, and I had been brought into it, not randomly, not completely, but with purpose, even if I did not fully understand that purpose yet. I moved toward the chair near the window, not to sit, but to change perspective, to see the room from a different angle, and as I did, something else caught my attention, subtle, almost easy to miss, the slight indentation on the carpet near the door, not recent, but not old either, a pattern of movement, of repeated steps, and I paused, my eyes narrowing slightly as I focused on it, tracing the direction, the frequency, the consistency. "Someone stands there often," I said, more to myself than to him, but I knew he heard it. I knew he was watching, evaluating, measuring. Adrian did not confirm it, did not deny it, but the silence stretched just long enough to tell me I was not wrong. And that small confirmation sent a different kind of awareness through me, because it meant I was starting to see it, starting to notice the patterns I had missed before, starting to understand the structure of this place, not just physically, but functionally. "Observation leads to understanding," he said quietly, and this time the words felt different, not like instruction, but like confirmation, like I had taken the first step into something I could not step out of easily. I turned back toward him, my expression steady, my thoughts clearer than they had been since I woke up. "And understanding leads to what?" I asked, and this time the question carried weight, not just curiosity, but intention. Adrian held my gaze, and for a moment, the room felt even more still, like everything was waiting for his answer. "Control," he said finally, and the word landed with a quiet certainty that echoed deeper than anything else, because it was not just about the situation, not just about survival. It was about something more, something that required awareness, precision, and the ability to see what others overlooked. And as I stood there, in a room that was never meant to feel like home, I realized that control was not something I had lost when I collapsed in the rain. It was something I had never fully understood until now. Control did not feel the way I expected it to. It was not loud or forceful or immediate. It did not come with certainty or strength. It came quietly, almost unnoticed at first, in the way my breathing stayed steady instead of breaking, in the way my thoughts aligned instead of scattering, in the way I chose where to look instead of letting my eyes move without purpose. And that realization settled deeper than anything else had so far, because it meant something had changed, not around me, but within me. I was no longer reacting. I was choosing, even if those choices were small, even if they were only the beginning. I shifted my weight slightly, my gaze returning to the indentation near the door, tracing it again, confirming what I had already noticed: repeated movement, consistent placement, someone standing there often, not randomly, not occasionally, but with purpose, watching, waiting. And that thought did not scare me the way it might have before. It sharpened my focus instead. Because if someone stood there often, then there was a reason, and reasons could be understood. "Who stands there?" I asked, my voice calm, measured, not demanding, but direct. Adrian did not answer immediately, and I recognized that pause now, not as hesitation, but as calculation. "Security," he said finally, and the word was simple, expected, but it carried weight, because it confirmed what I was beginning to understand, that this place was not just protected, it was actively monitored. Every space, every movement, every detail accounted for. I nodded once, absorbing that, then shifted my attention again, letting my eyes move across the room with more intention, more awareness, searching for anything else I might have overlooked, anything that did not fit the pattern I was starting to recognize. And that was when I noticed it. Not immediately obvious, not something that stood out at first glance, but something that felt slightly off the longer I looked at it. The angle of the mirror on the far wall, positioned not directly toward the bed, not directly toward the door, but slightly adjusted, just enough to reflect a portion of the hallway outside. When the door was open, I stepped closer to it, my movements slow, deliberate, my reflection shifting as I moved, but the angle remained the same, intentional, calculated. "This is not for the room," I said quietly, my eyes focused on the reflection rather than my own image. Adrian's voice came from behind me, calm, steady. "No," he said, and that single word confirmed it. The mirror was not for me, not for comfort, not for appearance. It was for observation, for awareness, for seeing without being seen, and that realization settled into place with everything else. Every detail here served a purpose. Nothing existed without reason, and if I paid attention long enough, I could start to see those reasons. I turned slightly, meeting Adrian's gaze again, my expression steady, more certain than before. "You said observe everything," I said. "That includes what is not meant for me." He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the conclusion without needing to expand on it. "Especially that," he replied, and there was something in his tone now, not approval, but something close to it, something that suggested I was moving in the right direction. I took a slow breath, letting the room settle around me again, but this time it felt different, not unfamiliar, not overwhelming, but structured, like I could begin to map it in my mind, understand it piece by piece. "Then there is more," I said quietly, more to myself than to him, because if one detail existed, others would too, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be noticed. I stepped back slightly, changing my angle again, looking at the room as a whole instead of focusing on individual elements, and slowly, the pattern began to form. The positioning of the furniture creating clear lines of sight, the absence of obstruction allowing visibility from multiple angles, the way the door aligned with the hallway, the way the mirror extended that view. It was not just a room. It was a controlled environment, designed to eliminate uncertainty, designed to ensure awareness at all times, and that realization made something click into place, something that extended beyond the physical space, beyond the room itself. "This is not just about protection," I said, my voice steady, thoughtful. "It is about information." Adrian did not respond immediately, but the slight shift in his posture told me enough. I was not wrong. I met his gaze again, more directly this time. "You do not just keep people safe," I continued. "You make sure you always know what is happening." The words felt heavier as I said them, not as an accusation, but as an understanding, as something I had uncovered on my own. Adrian's eyes held mine, steady, unreadable, but there was something there, something that acknowledged the accuracy of what I was saying without confirming it outright. "Knowing is what keeps people safe," he said finally, and the distinction was subtle, but important, because it shifted the focus from action to awareness, from reaction to preparation, and I felt that settle into place with everything else I had begun to understand. This place was not just about defense. It was about control through knowledge, through observation, through eliminating uncertainty before it could become a problem. I nodded slowly, letting that sink in, and then something else surfaced, something that had been building beneath everything else, a question that felt inevitable now, unavoidable. "And me," I said quietly, my voice steady but softer now. "What do you know about me?" The room felt still again, heavier, like everything had narrowed to that single question. Adrian did not look away, did not deflect, but he did not answer immediately either, and that pause carried more weight than any of his words so far, because it meant the answer existed, fully formed, already understood. "Enough to know you are not random," he said finally, and the words landed with a quiet intensity that made my breath catch slightly, because that changed everything again. It meant this was not just circumstance, not just coincidence. It meant there was a reason I was here beyond the moment I collapsed, beyond the questions in the bookstore, beyond the feeling of being followed, and that realization settled deep, sharper than anything before it. "Then what am I?" I asked, and this time the question was not uncertain. It was direct, intentional. Adrian held my gaze for a moment. Longer, and then he spoke, his voice lower, more precise than before. "That," he said, "is what we are going to find out." And the way he said it made something in my chest tighten, not with fear, but with something else entirely, something sharper, something more dangerous. Because for the first time since this started, I was no longer just trying to survive what was happening to me. I was part of understanding it. And whatever the answer was, whatever I turned out to be in all of this, it was not going to be simple, and it was not going to let me go once I knew it. The question did not leave the room when I asked it. It stayed there, suspended between us, heavy in a way that made everything else feel smaller, quieter, less important, and I realized that was what mattered most, not the room, not the rain, not even the situation itself, but the answer to that question, because whatever I was in all of this would determine everything that came next, not just for me, but for him, for whoever had noticed me, for whatever had already started moving long before. I understood it. I held his gaze without looking away, not out of defiance, but because looking away now felt like giving something up, like stepping back into uncertainty when I had just begun to move out of it. Adrian did not rush to fill the silence, did not soften it. He let it exist, let it stretch just long enough for me to feel the weight of it fully, and then he moved, not toward me, not away, but slightly to the side, changing the angle of the space between us, the way he did. Everything, deliberate, controlled, intentional. You are asking the wrong version of the question, he said finally, his voice low, steady, and that caught me off guard, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it, like the answer already existed, just not in the form I expected. Then what is the right version? I asked, and this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just focus. Because if there was a better question, I needed it. Adrian's gaze did not shift, but something in it sharpened slightly, like he was aligning the next step with how far I had come. Not what you are, he said, but why you were noticed. And that changed everything again, not the situation itself, but the way I had been approaching it, because I had been focused on identity, on what role I played, when the real question was about cause, about the moment something shifted, about the exact point where I went from invisible to relevant, and suddenly the memory of the bookstore came back, with a clarity it had not had before, not just the man, not just the questions, but the entire environment, the timing, the placement, the subtle details I had overlooked because they did not seem important at the time. I closed my eyes for a brief second, not to escape, but to focus, to isolate the memory from everything else, to strip it down to what mattered. The bell above the door when he walked in, the way the sound lingered just slightly longer than usual, the way he did not browse before approaching the counter, the way his eyes moved, not across the shelves, but across the room itself, mapping it, understanding it, and then the questions, not random, not casual, but structured, leading, designed to gather specific information, and then something else, something I had missed completely until now, something that made my breath catch as it came into focus. He was not looking for me, I said slowly, my eyes opening again as the realization settled in. Adrian did not react, but I could feel his attention sharpen, narrowing, focusing. He was looking for something else. I continued, my voice steady but quieter now, more precise, because this mattered, and I was just there. The words felt different as I said them, not like an explanation, but like a key, something that unlocked a part of the situation I had not understood before. Adrian inclined his head slightly, a small acknowledgement that I was moving in the right direction. Yes, he said, and the confirmation landed heavier than I expected, because it meant this was not about me being chosen, not at first. It was about proximity, about being in the wrong place at the exact moment something else was happening, and that realization shifted everything again. Then what was he looking for? I asked, and this time the question felt sharper, more targeted. Adrian's expression did not change, but there was something in his eyes now, something more direct, more intentional. That, he said, is what you were close to, and I felt that settle into place with everything else, because it meant the answer was not in the man, not in his questions, but in the environment, in the bookstore itself, in what was happening around me that I had not noticed. I turned slightly, my mind already moving, already retracing the layout, the shelves, the counter, the back room, the deliveries, the routine, everything I had taken for granted, everything I had not questioned. And then it surfaced, small at first, almost insignificant, but growing clearer the more I focused on it. The shipment, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. But I knew he heard it. I knew he was watching. There was a delivery that day. I continued, my thoughts aligning faster now, sharper, more precise. It came earlier than usual, and it was not from one of our regular distributors. I looked at him again, my expression steady, certain. I did not think anything of it. Adrian's gaze held mine, and this time there was no need for him to confirm it. I could see it in the way he watched me, in the way his attention had narrowed completely. I had found something that mattered. What was in it? He asked, and his voice was lower now, more focused, not demanding, but direct. I shook my head slightly, frustration flickering briefly before I pushed it aside. I do not know, I admitted. I did not open it. I just signed for it and placed it in the back. The memory sharpened further as I spoke. The weight of the box, heavier than books should have been. The lack of labeling beyond a simple shipping tag. The way the delivery driver had not made eye contact, had not lingered, had left immediately after, but it did not belong, I added quietly, the certainty in my voice surprising even me. Adrian took a step closer, just one, but it changed the space again, made everything feel more focused, more immediate. And the man, he said, he asked about your closing schedule. I nodded, the connection forming instantly, because he wanted to know when I would be alone. I finished, and the realization settled heavily, but not overwhelmingly. Not anymore, because now it made sense. Now there was structure, cause and effect, intention behind the chaos. You were not the target, Adrian said, his voice steady, confirming what I already understood. But you became relevant the moment you interacted with it. I let out a slow breath, the weight of that settling into place, because it meant everything had changed in that moment. The moment I signed for that delivery, the moment I placed it in the back room without questioning it, without thinking twice. I had stepped into something without realizing it, and now I was here because of it. Not by accident, not completely, but as a result of that single decision. I looked at him again, my expression steady, my thoughts clearer than they had ever been since this started. Then whatever was in that box, I said quietly, is the reason I am here. Adrian held my gaze for a moment longer, and then he nodded once, a small, precise confirmation. Yes, he said. And the word carried weight, more than anything else, because it was not just an answer, it was a turning point, a moment where everything shifted from confusion to understanding, from reaction to intention, and as the rain outside continued to fall in a steady, quiet rhythm, I realized something that settled deep in my chest. I was no longer trying to figure out what had happened to me. I was starting to understand why it had happened, and that difference changed everything, because now for the first time, I knew where to look next. The word yes did not feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning, like a door opening to something far more complicated than I had prepared for. And for a moment, I just stood there, letting it settle, letting the weight of that single confirmation expand into everything it implied, because now there was no uncertainty about the cause, no question about the moment everything changed. It was the box, the delivery, the thing I had accepted without thinking, and that realization did not make me panic. It focused me, sharpened every thought into something more deliberate, more precise. I moved slowly toward the window again, not to escape, not to distance myself, but to think, to anchor myself in something steady while my mind worked through what came next. The rain outside had softened into a quiet, steady rhythm. The city lights blurred behind the glass, distant and unreachable, and for the first time since I woke up, I did not feel disconnected from it. I felt separated from it. Intentionally, like this distance was part of the structure, part of the control Adrian had been talking about. If it is the reason, I said slowly, my voice measured, then they are not just looking for me. Adrian remained where he was, his presence steady, unmoving, but his attention sharpened slightly. They are looking for it. I finished, and the logic settled into place immediately, because if the box mattered enough to draw attention, enough to make someone follow me, then it was not something they would simply ignore. Adrian nodded once, a small, precise motion. Yes, he said, and that confirmation carried the same quiet weight as before, reinforcing the structure I was beginning to see. Then why not go back? I asked, turning to face him. Fully now, my voice steady, direct. Why not retrieve it before they do? The question felt logical, almost obvious, But the moment it left my lips, I could already sense the flaw in it. The part one was missing. Adrian did not respond immediately, and I recognized that pause now, not as hesitation, but as calculation, as the space where he evaluated the question against everything he already knew. Because it is no longer where you left it, he said finally, and the certainty in his voice made my chest tighten slightly, not with fear, but with realization, because of course it was not. Of course something that important would not remain untouched, not after everything that had happened, not after I had collapsed in the street, not after someone had already started following me. Then they have it, I said, and the words felt heavier than I expected. Adrian's gaze held mine, steady, unwavering. Or they are trying to find out who does, he corrected, and that distinction shifted everything again, because it meant uncertainty still existed, not just for me, but for them as well, and that uncertainty was the only reason I was still here, still breathing, still able to think this through instead of reacting blindly. I took a slow breath, letting that settle, because it changed the balance of the situation. It meant this was not over, not decided, not fully understood by either side. So they do not know, I murmured, more to myself than to him. Adrian inclined his head slightly, confirming it without words, and that small confirmation sparked something else, something sharper, more strategic, because if they did not know, then there was still time, still space to move, still a chance to understand before they did. Then the question is not just what was in the box, I said slowly, my thoughts aligning faster now. It is, who took it? Adrian's expression did not change, but his attention narrowed completely, focused entirely on me now. Exactly, he said quietly, and the word carried more weight than before, because it marked a shift, not just in understanding, but in direction. I nodded once, absorbing that. And then something else surfaced, something that had been building beneath everything else, a detail I had not fully considered until now. The store, I said, my voice steady but quieter, more precise. If something like that was delivered there, then it was not random. Adrian's gaze sharpened slightly, acknowledging the direction of my thoughts. No, he said, and the simplicity of the answer only reinforced the complexity behind it, because it meant the bookstore was not just a setting, not just a background. It was part of the situation, part of whatever had already been in motion before I stepped into it. Then someone chose that location. I continued, my mind moving quickly now, connecting pieces that had been scattered before. And if they chose it, then they expected something. Adrian remained silent, but his attention did not waver, and that was enough. Enough to tell me I was moving closer to something that mattered, and I interrupted that expectation. I added, the realization settling deeper as I said it, because that was what I had done, without knowing it, without understanding the consequences. I had stepped into something that was already planned, already structured, and my presence had changed it. Even if only slightly, even if only enough to create uncertainty. You did more than interrupt it, Adrian said, his voice lower now, more precise, and that made me pause, because the implication was clear. There was more to this than I had uncovered so far. Then what did I do? I asked, and this time the question felt heavier, more important. Adrian held my gaze for a moment longer, and then he spoke, his tone steady, deliberate. You became a variable, he said, and the words landed with a quiet intensity that made my breath catch slightly, because a variable was not just something that changed, it was something that could not be predicted, something that altered the outcome simply by existing within the equation. And suddenly everything he had said earlier about unpredictability, about uncertainty, about control, it all aligned, it all made sense. That is why they are not moving yet, I said slowly, the realization forming as I spoke, because they do not know how I fit into it. Adrian nodded once, confirming it without needing to add anything else, and that confirmation shifted something in me again, not fear, not panic, but clarity, sharper than before, more focused, because now I understood my position, not just as someone caught in the middle, but as something that had changed the balance of the situation itself. I stepped away from the window, my posture straightening slightly, my thoughts no longer scattered but aligned, moving in a clear direction. Then I need to know what they think I know, I said, my voice steady, certain. Adrian's gaze held mine, and for a moment, there was something there, something that had not been present at the beginning, Not approval, not trust, but recognition. Like he was seeing something in me that matched the situation, that fit within it. Yes, he said quietly, and the word carried weight, not just as confirmation, but as the next step, the next phase of something that had already begun. And as the rain outside continued its steady rhythm, fading further into the background, I realized something that settled deep in my chest. This was no longer about figuring out what had happened. It was about understanding how to move within it, how to navigate something that was still unfolding. And for the first time since I collapsed in the street, I did not feel like I was trying to catch up. I felt like I was finally in position to move forward. The moment the direction became clear, the room felt smaller, not physically, but mentally, like the boundaries had shifted from walls to decisions, from space to consequence. And I realized that knowing what to do next was not the same as being ready to do it, because understanding required action, and action meant risk. Even here, even in a place designed to eliminate it, I exhaled slowly, grounding myself in that thought, letting it settle instead of pushing it away, because avoiding it would only take me backward, and I was done moving backward. If I am a variable, I said quietly, my voice steady, then they are waiting to see how I move. Adrian did not respond immediately, but the slight shift in his gaze told me I was not wrong, that I was following the logic correctly. And if I do nothing, I continued, then I stay unpredictable, but I learn nothing new. The balance of it became clearer as I spoke, the tension between safety and understanding, between staying still and moving forward. Adrian stepped slightly closer, not enough to interrupt the space between us, but enough to make his presence more immediate, more focused. And if you move too soon, he said calmly, you give them something to measure. I nodded. Once, because that was the other side of it. The part that made this more complicated than it first seemed. It was not just about acting. It was about timing, about choosing the moment carefully enough that it revealed what I needed without giving away more than it should. So I need to control how I am seen, I said, the words forming clearly now, deliberate, intentional. Adrian's expression did not change, but there was something in his eyes that acknowledged the shift, the understanding. Yes, he said simply, and that confirmation settled into place with everything else, because it meant I was no longer just reacting to the situation. I was starting to shape it, even if only in small ways, even if only at the beginning. I turned slightly, my gaze moving back to the mirror, to the angle that reflected the hallway, and I stepped closer to it, positioning myself just enough to see what it revealed, not just the space beyond the door, but the way it captured movement, the way it extended awareness without exposing presence. And I understood then why it was placed there, not for convenience, not for design, but for advantage, for seeing without being seen, for knowing without announcing it, observation without exposure. I murmured, more to myself than to him. Adrian did not correct me, did not expand, but the silence confirmed it. I adjusted my position slightly, testing the angle, seeing how much of the hallway I could observe without stepping into it. And as I did, I noticed something else, something subtle, a shift in the light, a shadow that moved just beyond the edge of the frame, not random, not fleeting, but consistent, measured, and I stilled, my focus sharpening instantly, because this was not memory, this was now, this was real. Someone is there, I said quietly, my voice controlled, not alarmed, just aware. Adrian did not react visibly, but I felt the shift in the room, the way his attention aligned with mine without needing to confirm it. Yes, he said, and the simplicity of the answer made it more significant, because it meant this was expected, accounted for, part of the structure I was beginning to understand. I kept my gaze on the reflection, watching the subtle movement, the presence that did not fully reveal itself, and I realized something important in that moment. They were not just watching the space. They were watching for change, for deviation, for anything that broke the pattern, and that meant my next move mattered more than I had fully considered. If I step out there, I said slowly, my eyes still on the mirror, it changes the pattern. Adrian's voice came from just behind me, steady, precise, yes, and that single word carried weight, because it confirmed what I already knew, that any action I took would be noticed, measured, interpreted. But if I do not, I continued, then I remain part of the unknown. I turned slightly, meeting his gaze again, my expression steady, focused, and they will wait. Adrian held my gaze for a moment longer, then inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the conclusion. They will, he said, and that confirmation settled into place, reinforcing the balance I was starting to understand, the tension between movement and stillness, between revealing and concealing. I took a slow breath, letting the decision form, not rushed, not forced, but deliberate. Then I do not move yet, I said, and this time there was no uncertainty, no hesitation, just clarity. Adrian did not respond immediately, but there was something in his expression now, something that had not been there at the beginning, something that suggested this was not the answer he expected from someone in my position, not because it was wrong, but because it required control, restraint, understanding, and that was not something most people found easily in a situation like this. No, he said quietly, you do not. And the agreement carried more weight than before, because it was not just confirmation, it was alignment. I stepped back from the mirror slowly, my posture steady, my thoughts no longer scattered but focused, structured, intentional, and as I moved, I felt something settle deeper within me, something that had not been there when I woke up. Not fear, not confusion, but awareness, sharp and deliberate. Then I wait, I said, and this time the word felt different, not passive, not uncertain, but active, intentional. But I do not stay still. Adrian's gaze held mine, and for a moment, there was something there, something close to approval, though it never fully formed. Good, he said, and the word was simple, but it carried weight, more than anything else he had said so far, because it marked a shift, not just in understanding, but in position. I was no longer just someone caught in the middle of something I did not understand. I was part of it, actively, intentionally, and as the faint movement in the hallway continued, just beyond the edge of the mirror, I realized something that settled deep in my chest. This was no longer about escaping what had started. It was about navigating it, step by step, choice by choice, until I understood it well enough to decide what came next, and for the first time since I collapsed in the rain, I was not afraid of that. I was ready for it. The decision to stay still did not make the room quieter. It made me sharper, like every second stretched just enough for me to notice what I would have missed before, the faint shift of light in the hallway reflection, the subtle rhythm of footsteps that never fully appeared, the way presence could exist without being seen, and I realized that waiting was not empty. It was active. It was observation in its purest form. I moved slightly, not toward the door, not toward the mirror, but just enough to change my angle again, testing how the space responded, how the reflection adjusted, how much I could see without stepping into view. And the more I did, the more I understood something that had not been clear before. This was not just about them watching me. It was about me learning how they watched, what they prioritized, what they ignored, and that knowledge mattered. It shifted the balance in a way that was subtle but real. They are not just guarding, I said quietly, my eyes still on the mirror. They are measuring. Adrian's voice came from behind me, calm, steady. Yes. And the confirmation settled immediately, reinforcing the structure I was beginning to map in my mind. I took a slow breath, letting that settle, because it meant every movement I made, every decision, every change in pattern would be noted, analyzed, and that realization did not restrict me. It refined me. It forced precision, intention, control. Then I need to give them something, I said, and this time the words came without hesitation, without uncertainty, because the logic was clear. If they were waiting for change, then the change needed to be deliberate, controlled, something that revealed just enough without exposing everything. Adrian did not respond immediately, but I felt the shift in his attention, sharper now, more focused. What kind of something? He asked, and his voice carried a different weight now, not testing, but aligning. I turned slightly, meeting his gaze, my expression steady, deliberate. Something small, I said. Something that looks like a mistake. The idea settled as I spoke it, taking shape, becoming clearer, because a mistake was unpredictable. A mistake disrupted patterns without revealing intention. It created movement without giving away direction. Adrian held my gaze for a moment longer, and then there was a subtle shift in his expression, something that had not been there before, something closer to approval, though it remained controlled, contained. Go on, he said, and the words felt like an opening, like permission to continue. I turned back to the mirror, my mind already moving, already mapping the next step. If I stay completely still, they learn nothing. I continued, my voice calm, precise. But if I move too directly, they learn too much. I adjusted my position slightly, watching how the reflection changed, how the angle shifted. So I need to create movement that looks unintentional. Adrian remained silent, but I could feel his attention, steady, unwavering. And that was enough to know I was on the right path. The door, I said quietly, my eyes narrowing slightly as I focused on the frame, the handle, the way it aligned with the hallway. If it opened slightly, just enough to suggest hesitation, uncertainty. I paused, letting the idea settle, letting the structure form completely before I continued. They will watch more closely. Adrian's voice came from just behind me. Lower now, more precise. And what do you gain from that? I exhaled slowly, the answer already forming, already clear. A reaction, I said. And the word carried weight, because reaction meant information, reaction meant something had shifted, something had been noticed, something had been triggered, and that was what I needed, not just observation, but response, something I could measure, something I could understand. Adrian stepped slightly closer, not interrupting, not taking control, but aligning with the direction of the thought. And how will you read it? He asked, and this time the question felt different, not challenging, but refining. I considered it for a moment, not rushing, not guessing, because this mattered. The way I interpreted their response would determine everything that came next. Timing, I said finally, my voice steady. If they react immediately, then they are focused on me specifically. I shifted slightly, my gaze still fixed on the reflection. If there is a delay, then they are communicating, confirming, deciding. I turned my head just enough to meet his gaze again. And if there is no visible reaction, I added, then they already expected movement, which means I am not the only variable they are tracking. Adrian held my gaze. And this time, there was no hesitation, no pause, just a quiet acknowledgement that settled deeper than any words could. Good, he said, and the simplicity of it carried more weight than before, because it was not just approval. It was confirmation that I was no longer just learning the rules. I was beginning to use them. I turned back to the door, my hand hovering just inches from the handle, not touching it yet, not moving too quickly. Because even this moment mattered. Even this pause was part of the pattern, part of the structure I was beginning to control. I let my fingers rest lightly against the cool surface, grounding myself in the decision, in the intention behind it. And then I moved, slowly, deliberately, turning the handle just enough to create a faint shift, a subtle sound. Not loud, not obvious, just enough to exist, just enough to be noticed by someone who was already paying attention. I opened the door a fraction, no more than an inch, and then I stopped, holding it there, letting the moment stretch, letting the silence fill the space again. And in that silence, I listened, not just with my ears, but with everything, with the awareness I had been building since I woke up, with the understanding that every detail mattered, every reaction, every absence of reaction. And then I saw it, not directly, not clearly, but enough, a shift in the reflection, a movement that had not been there before, subtle but precise, controlled but immediate, and my breath slowed, not from fear, but from focus, because this was it. This was the response. This was the information I had been waiting for. I did not move, did not react. I held the position exactly as it was, letting the moment unfold, letting the pattern reveal itself. And as I watched, as I listened, as I understood, I realized something that settled deeper than anything else so far. I was no longer just part of the situation. I was influencing it, shaping it, even in small ways, even at the beginning. And that meant something had changed, something fundamental, because for the first time since this started, I was not just being watched, I was watching back. The movement in the reflection was not random. It was precise, immediate in a way that confirmed more than I expected. The response came too quickly to be casual, too controlled to be reactive, and that told me everything I needed to know in that moment. They were already watching this exact point, this exact door, not the entire hallway, not the entire floor, just this space, this position. And that meant I was not just a variable. I was the variable they had chosen to monitor most closely. I kept my hand steady on the door, not pulling it further, not closing it yet, holding that thin line of movement exactly where it was, letting the moment stretch, letting the silence speak, because the absence of additional reaction was just as important as the initial one. And as the seconds passed, I felt it settle into place, the pattern, the structure, the confirmation that this was not passive surveillance. This was targeted, deliberate, focused on me. I slowly released the handle, letting the door ease back into its original position without sound, without abruptness, restoring the stillness as if nothing had changed. And in that stillness, I stepped back, my posture relaxed but my mind sharper than it had ever been. Immediate response. I said quietly, my voice steady, controlled. No delay, no communication lag. Adrian's presence remained behind me, unmoving, but I could feel the shift in his attention, the alignment, which means, I continued, turning slightly to face him. They are already positioned to watch me specifically. Adrian met my gaze, and this time there was no pause, no need for calculation. Yes, he said, and the certainty in his voice carried more weight than before, because now it was not just theory, it was confirmed, tested, proven. I nodded once, absorbing that, letting it settle fully, because this changed the balance again, not in a way that made things easier, but in a way that made them clearer, more defined. Then I am not just a variable, I said slowly, my thoughts aligning with the realization. I am the variable they are prioritizing. Adrian's expression did not change, but there was something in his eyes now, something sharper, more focused. You are the point of uncertainty they cannot ignore, he said, and the phrasing mattered, because it was not about importance, not about value. It was about disruption, about the way my presence altered something they needed to control. I turned away slightly, my gaze moving back to the room, but this time I was not seeing it as a space. I was seeing it as a system, a structure designed to counterbalance exactly this kind of attention, and that realization settled deeper than anything else, because it meant this was not just about me learning how to navigate them. It was about understanding how Adrian had already prepared for this, how his world operated in response to situations like mine. You knew, I said quietly, my voice steady but more deliberate now. You knew they would focus on me like this. Adrian did not deny it, did not deflect, but he did not confirm it directly either, and that silence was enough to tell me this was not new to him, not unexpected, just another variable within a larger system he already understood. I knew it was likely, he said finally, and the distinction mattered, because it meant he had prepared for possibility, not certainty, and that was what made his control effective. Then this changes the next step, I said, turning back to face him fully now, my expression steady, my thoughts clearer than they had ever been since this started. Adrian inclined his head slightly, signaling for me to continue, not interrupting, not redirecting, just allowing the process to unfold. If they are focused on me, I continued, then they are not focused on everything else. The logic formed quickly, cleanly, because it followed the same principles he had been teaching me from the beginning. Attention was limited, focus was directional, and where it was placed determined what was missed. Adrian's gaze sharpened slightly, acknowledging the shift, the implication behind the words, "Go on," he said quietly, and the permission felt different now, not instructional, but collaborative. I stepped away from the door, moving slowly toward the center of the room again, my mind mapping the situation from a different angle, not just from my position, but from theirs, from what they saw, what they expected, what they were trying to control. If I remain the focus, I said, then I can shape where their attention stays. I paused briefly, letting the thought settle before continuing. And if I control their attention, I added, my voice lowering slightly, more precise, then I control what they do not see. The words carried weight as they settled into place, not just as an idea, but as a strategy, as something real, something actionable. Adrian watched me closely, and this time there was no hiding it, no subtlety. There was recognition in his expression, clear and direct. Yes, he said, and the agreement carried more weight than anything else he had said so far, because it was not just confirmation, it was alignment. I felt that settle into place, deeper than anything before it, because it meant I was no longer just understanding his world, I was thinking within it, moving within its structure instead of against it. And that realization changed everything. I glanced briefly toward the mirror again, toward the hallway that still held that quiet, controlled presence, and I saw it differently now, not as a threat, not as something to avoid, but as something to use, something to shape, something to guide. Then I stay visible, I said quietly, more to myself than to him, but I knew he heard it. I knew he understood, but only where I choose. Adrian stepped slightly closer, not enough to close the distance completely, but enough to make the connection clear. And what happens when they realize that? He asked, and this time the question felt different, not a test, but a projection, something meant to extend the thought beyond its current point. I held his gaze, steady, unwavering, my answer already forming, already clear. Then they adapt, I said, and when they adapt, they reveal more. The logic was simple, but the implication was not, because adaptation meant change, and change meant new patterns, new behaviors, new opportunities to observe, to understand, to control. Adrian's gaze held mine for a moment longer, and then he nodded once, a small, precise movement that carried more meaning than any words could, and in that moment, something settled fully into place, something that had been building from the very beginning. From the moment I opened my eyes in a place I did not understand, I was no longer trying to survive this situation. I was shaping it, influencing it, becoming part of the structure instead of being caught within it. And as the rain outside faded into a distant, almost forgotten rhythm, I realized something that settled deeper than anything else. Control was never about stopping what was happening. It was about understanding it well enough to decide where it went next. And for the first time since this began, I was no longer asking what would happen to me. I was deciding what would happen next.